My name's Anusha. I'm going to be talking to you about building and supporting your product team. A little bit about my career history and who I am. So I've been in product for 15 years or so. I started programming when I was about 12, building websites. Got really quite into it and went to Cambridge to study computer science, which was very, very different for me because I grew up in East London, but an interesting experience. After that, I worked at Microsoft and did an internship there for 3 months, and that was it was called a program manager, but effectively as a PM. And it taught me an awful lot about how the tech world works, but I didn't really want to work at such a huge company. I wanted to do some startup-y fun stuff. So I continued to do that for most of my 20s, and my favourite product, which you can kind of see how old I am, was an e-reader that we were trying to build and get live before the Kindle came out and before the iPad came out. So that's how old I am. So I did that, and I got a chance to live in San Francisco for 2 years doing that, worked with lots of cool people from Apple and ex-Apple people and IDEO. Came back to London, worked on some mobile apps for a bit. That was when Android had just come out, so that was very cool, mobile first. Then I spent a long time at eBay, 6 years almost. Joined as a PM and then became a senior PM and had a product there, looking after some of the B2C products as well as Seller Hub, so worked on both B2C and B2B products there. And then my last sort of big role was as head of growth at JustEat, working in the data team. We've got to do some really cool experiments, and one of my team members is here. Her name is Johanna, she's sent back. So that's quite cool, she can keep me honest. After that, I worked at over the summer, really worked with a small startup. So I'm going to use examples from those last 3 roles to talk to you about how I built teams in those very different environments, like a huge global company. JustEat, FTSE 100, it's pretty big as well, but it's definitely not the same scale. And then a tiny startup. What I learned from those experiences, and hopefully some of that will be helpful to you guys. Quick check in the room. Can I see a show of hands? Who here is someone who is currently a product manager, but not necessarily managing anybody, line managing anyone at the moment? Okay, I've got a couple of hands going up. Can I see a show of hands of people, someone who's a manager or a leader who does currently line manage as well? A couple more hands, slightly fewer hands. Do we have people in the room who aren't a product manager yet and want to be a PM? Oh, a couple more hands. Those people need their hands up higher because they'll get some mentorship or advice. I'm looking at Lang in the back. Hopefully there'll be something in here for all of you that you feel you can take forward in your day-to-day. So what is building a team about? Like, I really see it as a bit of a puzzle. Every team is its own little puzzle. And I was trying to think of a good analogy for what it feels like to lead a team. And I would describe it as playing Tetris in 3D. You're constantly trying to find, you've got an awesome team. Everybody thinks their team is awesome, hopefully. But you're trying to improve it, and the environment is constantly changing around you, and it's really, really complicated. But when it works really well, it's really, really satisfying, right? And that's what Tetris was like. And in terms of how I sort of think about pulling teams together and what teams really do while they're there, this is a model that I use when I'm coaching, and I felt it was relevant for this problem as well. If you start with the bottom corner, me, why am I leading this team? What is this team going to do? All right, phew, Mike's okay. What's it there for? Why did I decide I want to be the leader of this team? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Where do I need help? Where do I need to grow? And I need to understand, you need to know why you're leading a team, and it doesn't always happen because you chose it. Sometimes a team chooses you. Sometimes someone goes, hey, we need you to go and do this thing. It's not necessarily immediately straightforward. You need to stop and think about that question. Similarly, on the company objective side, there's always objectives, as the previous example was showing us. Key company goals, revenue goals, conversion metrics, OKRs, whatever. They're very explicit. You can say this team has to deliver this by this date. But then there are hidden objectives, things people don't necessarily tell you and make explicit when you start. And I'll come to one of those examples when I was at JustEat. People would talk a lot about delivery and velocity, but really one of the most biggest challenges was similar to the previous one about stakeholder management, about getting two different teams to talk to each other that weren't really communicating very well. But nobody said that out loud, right? It took some digging to figure that out. And then, of course, the team itself. Who's in your team? What are they doing? Why are they there? What motivates them? All their strengths and weaknesses. And one of the things we sometimes do with technical teams, and I'm saying that broadly because I've line managed design, product, engineering, and delivery, and it's kind of the same across all those disciplines. We think a lot about the technical things, the buzzwords of, has this person built a complex portfolio? Or, do they know how to use this component or this tool suite or whatever? And we sometimes neglect to think about the non-technical things that we need in a team for it to be great, and how we need people to be different in a team for it to be great. So it's important to kind of assess all of those things. And the great teams, the successful ones, the ones that do great, are the ones that are right bang in the centre of those three circles, meeting your needs of the team, needs of the company, all at the same time. So how do you actually make that happen? So my strong recommendation basically is to ask really good questions. And that is, I think, is a great way. It sounds very simple, but it's the way that you make sure you're constantly staying in the centre of these three circles. So let me jump to my first example. So eBay, I joined eBay about 8 or 9 years ago. I was a PM at the time, and the goal that my director had was to build a new agile team in Europe. So most of eBay's development was done in San Jose on the West Coast, and quite a lot in other destinations around the world, but there was no real in-house development team in Europe. And we did grow to, I feel like it was 70 people over 18 months. So it was pretty fast. But we really had to think about who we're hiring, how we're hiring, what are we going to be doing. And I learned an awful lot about how you scale quickly. And this is still the template that I use when I'm growing teams. So one of the first things that the head of engineering did was he scrapped the sort of tick box entry requirements. So eBay's a very well-established company. It's been going for probably 20 years. And I think in terms of that formal environment, it was just expected that you would have a degree in X. You were just expected to come from top flight universities. There's so many people there from Bain and McKinsey and these top consulting companies. But in order to be a great developer or a great product manager, you don't need those degrees, and we know that. And he took quite a bold decision and had to convince quite a few people that I believe, I wasn't part of that conversation, but he got rid of those requirements and opened the talent pipeline hugely. And what he did at the same time was he made our hiring really informal and friendly. So you didn't just come in and do a presentation or, as an engineer, come and answer 20 questions and then go home feeling exhausted. You got a tour, you got to meet random people from other departments, and you got to have lunch with some of the team members that you actually might, hang out with, hopefully, if you came to join us. And so he made it a much more welcoming experience for everybody that walked in the door. The key thing, though, for me, from my learning, was to learn about behavioural interviewing techniques, which essentially is about asking people to give you an example of when they did something, and then asking them to talk to you about what they learned from that experience. So I think prior to this, when I was interviewing, and I was fairly young, I was still in my late 20s, I would just look for people who had the right buzzwords and kind of could look like they knew what they're doing, felt confident. I wasn't really digging in very deeply into the answers they gave me. But by using this sort of structured questioning, and you can Google about it, by basically saying, give me an example when, so a typical PM1 would be, give me an example when you had to make a really tough prioritization call. Give me an example when your stakeholder completely disagreed with the stories that you wrote. And it's not just what you did to make that situation great, it's being able to reflect on what you could have done better. If it did go well, then yes, but there's always things that you can reflect on and talk about how things could potentially improve in the future. And it is the most powerful thing when you're hiring, is to ask questions like these and get people who can be honest and be reflective and think about where they're going and be basically learning. So this was a team that knew how to learn, and a team that knows how to learn is a team that's going to grow and get better all the time, which is what you want. So that's my first example. Second example is from JustEat. So JustEat's much more recent. About 2 years ago I joined, and this was the one I mentioned earlier. Like, the team itself that I adopted was working on a lot of legacy tools, not entirely, but they were effectively working on a lot of marketing stuff, and they were very, very busy. And what I did was the team sort of got moved departments under the chief data officer. I came in reporting to him, and he wanted to do lots of cool data AI stuff. I think I could probably quote him in saying that is actually what he told me was my job description, do lots of cool data AI stuff. He wanted to make experimentation happen. He wanted it to be just the norm for how it works. And he wanted to use the amazing data that a company like JustEat has about what people buy and what their preferences are to, grow the business. I think in terms of what my growth team and people around me we achieved, we absolutely were able to do that. I took some of the numbers out of here. I'm sorry I'm not being more specific, but as the talk's being recorded, I didn't want to share those. But in essence, we were able to show that a team within JustEat could be experimenting rapidly and could deliver revenue-generating experiments fairly quickly. And going from a team that struggled to deliver one experiment in a whole quarter to a team that could deliver like 10, 11, 12 in a matter of weeks was just amazing over the course of like a year. So it was a huge amount of growth. The team itself grew as well. It doubled in size. And one of my proudest things is that I had 4 senior technical roles in the team, and 3 of those were filled by women as well. And it wasn't something I did intentionally. It just happened. So that's awesome. So learnings and things to share with you guys. So I think this isn't just medium-sized companies in any way, but a common problem that engineering teams have or that people kind of imply is, how are you going to improve the velocity of this team? How can you make this team deliver more? And really what it feels like when someone comes up to you and says that to you about your team is, be more productive, do more stuff. Like, you have all these people, why aren't you getting more done? And of course, that is never actually the problem, right? I walked into this team and they were working so hard, it was crazy. Like, they were just working incredibly intensely. And I'm sure you've all felt this in companies that you've been in as well. Like, it just, you feel like you're just trying to do so many things. And they had this issue, which is, Agile is all about flow. And they had this thing where they were working on many things in parallel. All of them were progressing. Everything was happening. But because they had so many different things in flow all at the same time, they never really got to the end of stuff to say, yay, we did it. And so the impression from people from the outside was that nothing's happening here, like stuff just keeps getting delayed. So when I first got there in Q4, we sort of sat down and went through what the goals were for the team. And I think the list was something like 60 line items. I know it was definitely more than I could remember. And, for me, that said it all, that we were just trying to do too many things. We need to say no to more stuff. And so me and my leadership team, we started to work with our stakeholders to say, here's the stuff we can't do because we're going to focus on this stuff. And then I set a single top line goal for the whole team, deliver one experiment in 1 quarter. I don't care what the experiment is. I don't care how much of an impact it has, but try and do something that's impactful. And have some fun learning how to do experimentation. And they did workshops, they set up a whole bunch of things themselves, they did hackathons themselves, and tried to go after that goal. And in terms of the question that I was asking, it was quite simply, what are you working on? Can you tell me what you're working on? And is it the most important, valuable thing that you could be working on right now? Because there's always too many things to be doing, whether you're a PM, you're an engineer, whatever role you're playing in a tech team. Is what you're doing really lined up with the handful of goals that we've agreed as a team and told everyone that we're going to be working on? And by me asking that question, the team then started to ask themselves that question. And we unearthed lots of things. Of course, it doesn't work in just a couple of weeks or in just one quarter. It takes a lot of time to weed out all the stuff that you want to stop, to hand it over, to shut it down, to whatever you need to do to reduce your portfolio down to something that's more manageable for the team that you have. But the team had got into the practice of just going, oh my gosh, people want this thing. We have to find a way of doing it. And working ridiculously hard to try and make that happen. But it's super important to just go, well, hang on a sec, this thing is more important than this thing. That is the fundamental, basic rule of product, prioritize. But they needed some space and a framework around to help them do that. But these were the key questions that we were always asking ourselves to make sure that we were staying focused and staying on track. I've got time, so I just cover the second point here, which is more a people point. This was the first time for me that I was a skip level manager. So I went from managing, directly line managing 4 or 5 people to, at the end of, I think at its peak, the team was about 28 people in 3 different locations. And I didn't really know how to do that. And one of my things I was a bit insecure about was, how do I make sure I'm really there for everybody and they're all growing and all learning stuff that they need to, because I can't physically be there all the time. How do we structure something like that? And what I did with my leadership team, so the line managers that most people reported to, was we did a quarterly, actually possibly even every 6 weeks, we did a performance check-in. We went through absolutely everybody in the team and just talked about where they're at. Is this person struggling with anything? Do they need help? Or is this person someone that's one of our high potential people? Could this person potentially get a promotion? And then we kind of shared between us, giving special focused attention to the people that were either struggling or those who were our top performers, to make sure that they were getting that support that they needed. You can scale what you do, I think is the point from this. You work with other people to do that. But if you want your team to be better, I did some training at eBay once where they were basically saying, if you're a line manager, you need to be spending at least 30% of your time making your team better at the things that you already know how to do. Otherwise, you're effectively your team's never going to be growing and you're never going to have the space to go and learn to do the things that you need to learn to do now. So I think it's super important to put your energy and time into your team and their growth. So, final example. So Far Sounds. So I started working with So Far Sounds in sort of springtime. They are a music tech company. They set up really intimate gigs, 30, 40 people with up-and-coming artists in hundreds of cities around the world. If you like listening and discovering new music, go to a So Far Sounds. It's really good. I'm a musician, so I was like, yes, I would love to help out this little company. And in terms of what they were going through this really painful growth stage. So they had maybe 4 or 5 engineers. It was a very small team, and 2 PMs and 1 designer, I think, when I started. But they were at that awkward stage where they knew they needed to get to 2 teams or possibly 3 teams, but they weren't quite there yet, and they didn't quite have the balance of people in the team to make things happen. They didn't quite have the decision makers in place in terms of their leaders in the executive team. And there was just a lot of organisational change happening. They also had issues with product planning, because going from being a team that plans for one team, you all do one thing all the time, to having multiple streams was one of their challenges. And really what I helped them to do in the time that I worked with them was to help them think a bit more cross-functionally and collaborate. I'll show you how, as well as helping them to make some big decisions about starting a technical migration that led to some good conversion uplift. So what was the actual doing? So how I help them. So what I noticed was, and this is again, I think fairly typical of a startup or a really small company, is when you're at a startup, you are the only person that does your thing. There isn't any backup. You really are relied on in a way that it just doesn't happen at larger companies. And people were so dedicated and so determined to do their part and contribute. They absolutely all loved the brand and loved what the company was trying to achieve. But that meant they were always heads down, trying to get the job done of whatever was in the sprint. And for the PMs as well, like really incredibly busy. They just didn't have any time to breathe. And we all know what that feels like. Like, there is a roadmap that needs doing. There is some user testing that you haven't read all the details of. But it's so hard to find the time and space to go and dedicate yourself to that. And really what I did when I think about it was working with them was, when I initially asked them, what do you think the things we need to do to improve the product are? What are the things we need to do to help you guys work more efficiently, work better together, grow the team? And what would happen was they would go, we need to do this, but in order to do this, we have to do this, and this, and this, and this, and then, oh God, like we're exhausted and we don't have enough time. And we don't want to have a meeting that runs more than an hour because we have so much else to do. And they would just go around in circles, like not making any decisions, basically. But the team knew way better than any of the managers did. And the managers even recognized this. They were like, the team needs to tell us what they need to do, and we'll create the space to help them do that. So what I did was a couple of workshops with them, just talking about, what is the problem we are trying to solve? Like, we could solve all of those things and everything that comes up, but what is really the problem that we want to solve? And what can we do now? Just the first step, towards solving that issue. And instead of trying to, because I think they felt under pressure to kind of have a perfect plan and to kind of make sure that if they were going to say to one of their leaders, like, we have to do this thing, that they could explain it and justify it and know it all the ins and outs and all the pros and cons and have all the answers to all the questions. But you can't do that, right? We all know that. But, in half an hour, what is the one thing that's slowing you down the most? It turned out, I think, one of the early conversations I remember was the test suite. The test suite took like 40 minutes to run. And they just focused on that one bit and found that with a couple of changes over a couple of weeks, they reduced that time in half, and it made them so much happier and so much more efficient. But they kept trying to solve the huge problems. So just think about, what can I do now? What's the first step that I can take? And they started to feel like more empowered to make change and make their own experience of working there better, but also make the product better. I think also, as a fairly small team, they were really distributed. So far as in like hundreds of countries around the world, and their employees are also distributed globally. So all of their meetings were on Zoom. A lot of their meetings were remote. And I think at first I was like, wow, that's really cool. It really kind of, level playing field for everybody, wherever you're working from. But at times, you do need that face-to-face connection. And so, but it was really important to the team that nobody felt left out of big discussions and meetings. So what I then did was I managed to find excuses to have a sub-team of the people that were actually in the office to work on a particular thing that wasn't necessarily product delivery. So I had to do some hiring. That was one of the things they asked me to do, was to help them hire designers, product managers. And so when I was inventing the interview process, which was really similar to the eBay interview process, I worked with a couple of people in person, and we designed the exercises together, we talked about the feedback together, and this small group of people just got to know each other a lot better, so that when they did have to work on stories and ACs or tests or whatever they needed, they just had much easier conversations. And not everything you do has to be related as a team to either the product delivery, core product delivery, or I would say they socialised a lot outside of the office as well. But that's different. It's a very different environment, right? When you're socialising, having pizza and a drink. It's important to actually work together on things that aren't necessarily just your product backlog. If you can find opportunities to do that, your team will come together and be more connected. So, summarise. So really what I'm trying to convey to you is I think how questions can be really powerful, and how as a leader, the questions you ask set the tone for what the team thinks matters. what they believe in, what they ask themselves every day. And everything you say as a leader is magnified. So have a think about what questions you've been asking your team, and if they are the questions that you want them to really be asking themselves every day. Some of the tips for how to do that, try to ask open questions. Open questions usually start with a what or a how, and then be quiet. Don't speak. Just listen and try and really absorb everything that person is trying to tell you. There'll be loads of stuff in there, but there'll be some stuff that you weren't expecting. You know, be in a mode of just kind of absorbing the information and really observing. You also need to, as a leader, observe and correct behaviour. A talented team is one that makes mistakes and learns from them. So if you ask the questions about, how did we get here? Like, how do you think this could have gone differently? Or is there anything you wish you would have done differently? You teach them to ask themselves those questions and improve. And then, try and surround yourself with people who are better and different to you, because they will ask better and different questions to you. Like, nobody wants to work in a homogenous team. Like, you learn so much from everybody that you work with and people you spend so much of your time with these people. That's something I just very strongly believe in. My very last point is to remember to ask, how are you? For me, that is the most important question. I always try and make at least 5 minutes, just to ask somebody how they are. And you can't always, just say, how are you? Because you'll just get a snap. Oh, I'm good, everything's fine, I'm great. Right? You sometimes need to ask in a slightly different way. How have things been recently? How do you think the quarter's going for you? What's top of mind for you at the moment? Ask what's really happening as a human for the person that you're talking to. And I mean this not just for members of your team, it could be your peers, it could be your managers, it could be, outside of your circle. But it's such an important question, and we don't really ask it, and we don't really listen to the answer. But as a leader, one of the hardest things is to know what's happening in your organisation, especially as you lead larger and larger teams. You just got, at one point at eBay, there were 100 people working on the Seller Hub product that I was leading in 7 different locations. It was just impossible to know. No status report, no product dashboard was really going to tell me what was actually going on. But a question to individuals about, how are things actually going? How are you? You can learn so much in just 5 minutes. So go back to work tomorrow and ask someone some of these powerful questions. I hope you found this helpful. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions for me?
Thank you. That was very, very interesting. So right now you're working in a company that's scaling or has been scaling. Have you been thinking about, when we talk about scaling, sometimes we talk about creating another team that is like the growth team versus the normal team. It's kind of a concept that I would like to have your opinion on this, because there's a lot of debate about this, and especially if you face different situations where it has worked and not worked, it will be interesting, I think.
Sure. So I should say I'm not currently working it so far. I am going to be working somewhere new, hopefully in the new year, but I'll keep that a secret. But to the question, there is definitely a trend to create a separate growth team. When I was at eBay, there was a trend to create a separate innovation or labs team, and that was kind of the way the European team looked. And I'm going to give a "it depends" answer, right? I've seen it work, I've seen it not work. The tricky thing is really what an organisation is trying to do is create some sort of cultural change in some direction. Like, let's be more innovative, let's think more about the commercial impact of what we're doing. It's very hard to do that with product. You don't always know what's going on. And I think it does serve a purpose to sometimes have a centre of excellence or a small group of people working on that cultural change that you want to see happen everywhere without necessarily being weighed down by the way the whole company normally does things. And that change is relevant to whatever kind of thing you're trying to do, whether it's like, let's get better at being data-driven, or let's get better at doing UX. Some companies struggle with that. But I think what you need to make sure is that you have some path or plan for how that cultural goodness, assuming it does work well, can then spread to other teams, and how the learnings from one team can move into others. You can do that with things like moving people across discipline, So we had a pairing scheme at eBay where essentially a developer could go, let's call it a pair swap. A developer could go into another team that was completely different for 2 weeks just to go and see what they were doing. So they would sit and pair with that team, learn about their technology, learn about their product, learn about their ways of working. But the deal was, when they came back, they needed to share what they learned, because it was a learning experience for everybody. Like, what was good in that team? What did they do better than us? What did we actually do better than them? Because everybody likes to say that sometimes. But also, at some point later in that quarter, ideally, somebody would then come from that team that they swapped into, and so that would a way for you to kind of spread best practice across the organisation and for everybody to be learning from each other rather than sort of being really siloed. So there are techniques like that you can use, but I can see why, in a very large organisation, you don't want to try and change everything at once. And I think sometimes when they create a growth team or a labs team, that's why that happens. But it's a tough problem.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Great, thank you.